In our study of world geography, chapter 3, lesson 2, we're focused on culture and the elements of culture. Our essential question for today's lesson is what makes a culture unique? We're going to first define what culture is and then look at the different aspects that make the different places that we're studying in the world, the different peoples in the world, really unique. And my challenge for you, 8th grade, is to take this perspective of what we're learning in culture and then apply it to your own life. We're going to learn about 8 different elements of culture, and I want you to think about how does that apply to me, or what's an example from my own life that fits into the definition of these different elements of culture. Those different elements of culture are listed here on the left. The first is ethnic groups, then we have language, religion, customs, history, arts and sports, government, and economy. These 8 different elements shape and influence and factor into a person's own culture or own group that they would categorize themselves in. In your worksheet, I have a picture of that worksheet right here. It asks you in this first section to fill in those elements of culture. So these words are going to go right into these blanks. The directions say that culture is a set of beliefs, behaviors, and traits shared by a group of people. So these are different things that can cause people to have something in common, different beliefs, behaviors, and traits shared by a group of people. These are the ways in which we would distinguish a person's culture in a more specific way than simply using this broad umbrella definition of what culture is. Culture is the set of beliefs, behaviors, and traits shared by a group of people, and these are the ways in which those cultures can be defined or identified. As you read this section, complete the diagram below by identifying those elements of culture. Like I said, these 8 are going to be listed in these 8 circles on your note page. What I'd like you to do is draw a line off of each of those and then write, how does it actually apply to me? What's an example of my ethnicity, the language that I speak, the religion that I practice, the customs, history, arts and sports, government, and economy that influence the way in which I live my life? If you're able to identify and learn what these things are and then apply them to yourselves, that understanding is only going to grow and be beneficial for you, both as you understand yourself in your culture, in your people's culture, but also as you understand different parts of the world, the different peoples in the world that we're going to study. Let's get into and understand those a little bit more. The first one of those is ethnic groups. Ethnic groups, by definition, is a group of people with a common racial, national, tribal, religious, or cultural background. So members of these different groups have these things in common. Your ethnicity is often considered race, or your nationality, maybe a specific tribe or religious or cultural background can be a way in which people are ethnically grouped together. Too often I think people often think of ethnicity as simply just a race thing, this or that, where an ethnic group can be more than just a racial distinction. It can be racial, it can be national, it can be tribal, it can be religious. For example, our ethnic group, what we share is the fact that we are Americans. Regardless of our skin color, regardless of our heritage, of the people that we come from or our ancestors, we have the American ethnicity to us because we live in America. Number 2 is language. Language serves as the powerful form of communication in which people are able to communicate back and forth through either written or usually verbal or vocal ways in which they're speaking. Now, languages are going to define a culture because people speak different language. Some people are able to speak and they learn how to speak multiple languages. When you get into high school, you're going to be required to take a foreign language, but the way in which people talk can define a person's culture or an aspect of their culture. One way in which language can be a a unifying factor is that if like a group of people, like say here in the United States, we speak English, but where you go in the United States will factor into how that English actually sounds. As you're reading through the section, you're going to learn about what's called a dialect. People might speak the same language, but they might speak differently. So language can be different based on speaking different languages, but it also can be different based on the dialect or a regional variety of a language with unique features such as vocabulary, grammar, or pronunciation. We might say car or bag, and somebody with a Boston accent might say ka or bag or haba. So that's my impersonation of a Boston accent, but somebody from the East Coast might sound a little bit different from somebody here in the Midwest. Somebody from down south might speak a little bit differently from somebody here in the Midwest. Maybe you've heard somebody say y'all as a part of their distinction to a group of people. And that's one thing that is a dialect unique to a specific part of a country or a specific part of the world. That can be a distinguishing factor in language as well. Next, we have religion. Religion is a major influence on how people of a culture see the world. If you have a biblical worldview, because your culture as a Christian teaches you how the world was created, teaches you what your position is in the world, teaches you your value in the world, you see the world a little bit differently. So based on people's religion, they have different views of the world, and that can be an influence on their culture and how they're going to believe. If their religion has specific types of beliefs that they have to follow, or specific types of traditions or things that they have to do, for example, going to worship, or different times for prayer and activities or gatherings, different types of holidays, those are all going to influence a people's culture. Next, and somewhat related to religion, is customs. Customs are also an important outward display of culture. In many traditional cultures, people are going to show their expression or their pride in their culture by carrying out a specific type of custom. One thing that you might see that's different from the United States and other parts of the world, when we see somebody, when we meet somebody, we shake their hand. That's a custom that is normal to the United States. But you go to other parts of the country, there might be people that greet each other in a different way without any type of handshake, or maybe even there's some type of a kiss on the cheek here or there, a different type of hug or gesture that's different than a handshake. Those customs are unique to a people and unique to different parts of the world. Number 5 is history. History shapes how we view the world, and our own personal history, maybe even our own family history, is influential into our aspect of culture or our position and our standing in the world as well. So a lot of times people like to think, well, my ancestors are from here. If you've got the distinction to say, I'm an African American, you're saying you're originally from, or your ancestors are from Africa, and you're making that distinction to say, well, now I live in America, but I have this cultural heritage as an African American, right? We can call ourselves in an ethnic group together Americans, but there's that specific historical distinction. For example, Mr. Shane, in his lineage and his family history, comes from different parts of Germany and I believe Poland. There's a couple other things that are mixed in there, but there's a different aspect of history and that kind of reverence for where you come from and the people that you come from that factors into how you carry yourself and how you walk about each and every day in life. 6 and 7 are arts and sports, and this can be factored into how people are going to go about their entertainment. In different parts of the world and in different societies, people value different types of activities as their entertainment or as their leisure more than others. It also factors into different times in history where arts and sports are viewed and valued in different ways. For example, the Olympics that were supposed to take place this summer were originally started in Athens, Greece, as these wonderful games, and they were a huge part of that culture. Now they've become a worldwide phenomenon, and every 4 years we get together for the Summer Olympics, and then 2 years in between that we've got the Winter Olympics, and we go on this rotational schedule. Different countries in different parts of the world have different sports that they favor and that they kind of celebrate as their own. Here in the United States, we have a focus on American football. We have the major sports of hockey, basketball, baseball, soccer, and then now have kind of branched into even having more professional sports and opportunities for women rather than just having those same type of opportunities for men. So sports are a major part of American culture. It might be important to you, it might not be. So that's a different aspect of the way in which that can be distinguished between each person and their personal beliefs or their personal practice. Some people care a lot about sports, others don't care so much. Some people care a lot about the arts, not only in the form of physical arts, paintings and sculptures, but also in the form of musical art or dance, some type of showmanship or some type of performance art that is a way in which, again, we get our entertainment. Those things are varying in how people value those and varying in how cultures or in different countries and peoples value those things as well. Number 7 is government. Government is another element of culture because it is going to shape how you live. Your governing body is going to determine the laws and the regulations of the place in which you live, and you as a citizen have to meet those laws and meet those expectations. So things that are in our country that might be handed down from our government are different than what are provided by governments in other countries, therefore making an influence and an impact on your life and on my life. Lastly, we have the economy. Economy is the last piece of the way in which cultures vary because the economy is dependent upon a lot of times the resources that countries have and the resources that people have. Your influence in the economy is going to be based on your job or your career, something that you're getting paid for. Either you're producing something or you're selling something or you're consuming something with your type of business, and there's different levels to the economy that we'll learn about, but this is the last aspect that influences culture. Now you've got those 8 items written into each of these circles. I want you to think about how those things apply to yourself. What ethnic groups would you say you're a part of? What language do you speak? What religion do you practice? Do you have any customs or traditions or celebrations? And every year at Garden Homes in the summertime, we have a celebration for Juneteenth, the emancipation of slaves in the United States. That would be an example of customs that are celebrated. That also kind of ties into a people's history in terms of your heritage and where you come from. And then what arts, sports do you value? The government that we're living under is our representative democracy or constitutional republic, either one you wanted to call it. And we have a free market economy that allows people to compete in businesses to kind of be the best that they can in what would be a free market with little to no regulation on those things besides obviously the government taxing that type of activity, the ability for people to go out and have a job and to make money or to run a business in those ways. To sum up the elements of culture, let's review. Culture is a set of beliefs, behaviors, traits shared by a group of people. Many people belong to more than one culture. That's one thing that people often like to kind of distinguish themselves and say, I'm part of this culture, but there's actually multiple cultures that you can be a part of based on the different elements and different factors that go into defining culture. An ethnic group is a group of people with a common racial, national, tribal, religious, or cultural background. So we can call ourselves an ethnic group of Christians together. Elements of culture include language, religion, customs, history, arts, sports, government, and economy, what we just covered. A cultural region. There's one more paragraph in this section in your reading. A cultural region is a geographic area in which people have certain traits in common. You might find this to be what is true in the city of Milwaukee, or as Wisconsinites, or as people from the Midwest, or as Americans. The geographic area and then what those people have in common is another aspect that defines what would be a cultural region. After you read about cultural region, you're going to get into the specific study of the different forms of government and how those are going to have an impact. The ones that are listed in our textbook are listed in this chart here. The first is democracy. It's defined as the system of government that is run by the people. Now, people often think that the United States is a democracy. Yes, it is, because the people are allowed to vote for elected representatives, but it's also the distinction as a constitutional democracy. What those representatives have to follow isn't always just the popular vote. It's based on the Constitution and those different Bill of Rights that have been placed in, and the different amendments that have been made to the Constitution that are the governing resource that those representatives, those elected officials, are operating by. So that democracy is a system of government run by the people. Here in the United States, we have a constitutional democracy. The next one listed in your reading is a monarchy. Now, monarchy is different from a democracy in the way that a monarchy is ruled by a king or queen and often is associated with having some type of royalty or royal family that is the representative head of a country. After you read about and learn about a monarchy, you're going to understand to learn about a dictatorship. A dictatorship is a form of government in which one person has absolute power to rule and control the government, the people, and the economy. In a dictatorship, that one person is entrusted with all that responsibility, and oftentimes, and as we're going to see in our study of different aspects of history in different parts of the world, that turns into maybe sometimes a power trip or a tyrannical way in which the one person is in charge of everything and they want to have their hands in everything and they want to control everything. That can be maybe a not so great way in which people living underneath that dictator are actually experiencing life. Oftentimes, we're going to learn about the different human rights that are taken away from individuals because of the rules that are placed by a dictator in certain instances. After the study on the different types of government, we're going to get into the different types of economy. before that, I want to make sure that we have an understanding of the United States government overall. If I ask you to describe the system of government in the United States, would you be able to tell me that it is a representative democracy, a form of democracy in which we elect officials? Those elected officials can be in two of the three different branches of government. See, our government has three branches that operate in this system of checks and balances. These arrows pointing back and forth between these three branches point to those different checks and balances to say, well, one of these isn't the sole power source or the sole proprietor of all the things that are happening in our country. We've got the White House, which is the executive branch. We've got the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. And we've got the legislative branch, which is the Senate and the House of Representatives that are going, or Congress, that are going to make the laws. So the president is the head over all these things. He's the one that signs those laws into place. He's the person who kind of makes those final decisions. But to make sure that he doesn't have all the power, Congress is actually going to write the laws. The president has the ability to veto that law, means turn it down, or to approve that law that's been written. Now, when Congress is making laws to make sure that they're making laws that are constitutional, the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, is going to make sure that what they're saying makes sense based on the Constitution. So there are 9 Supreme Court judges that make sure that the laws that are being put in place are constitutional, and they make sure that the president is doing his job and not exceeding his power in that way. This representative democracy or constitutional democracy that we have here in the United States operates in what is called the system, again, of checks and balances. The next section that you're going to read about talks about the way in which there's culture that changes. I jumped ahead of myself a little bit before. You'll have to forgive me when I said we're going to learn about economies. That's actually in the next lesson. The aspects of cultural change that you're going to read about point to the idea that cultures change over time as a result of migration. When people move from place to place, the things that you would have done at your old living space or the old place in the world that you lived are different than what you're going to do in the new place that you lived, just based on the geographic region that you're living in. Maybe it's a change in culture based on travel. Maybe it's based on trade or war and technology. All these things have a major influence on how people live their life and how those people will be grouped together in what would we define as culture. Technological changes have made communication and travel faster and easier and have contributed to a rapid spread of culture and exchange of ideas. You're going to see as we study the different parts of the world that we are more connected to those parts of the world than any other time in history because of the way in which technology has enhanced our ability to communicate and travel. Because of that, we have a lot more cultural blending or a lot more globalization that's taking place in which people learn about other places, learn about other peoples. They might visit those places. They might have connections to those places. And now you have the sharing and spreading of the cultures and exchanging of ideas between those different peoples. Globalization is the process by which nations, cultures, economies become integrated, and this has resulted in cultural blending on a wider scale than ever before. Process by which nations, cultures, and economies become integrated. For example, if our economies are integrated, something that we're selling here in the United States is bought somewhere else. Or if you've ever purchased something that says made in China, our economies are integrated. Process by which nations and cultures are integrated. If people from certain countries are moving to other countries, their cultures and their nationality, those things are going to blend together. Oftentimes, the United States is described in two ways. One, as a melting pot, because there are cultures and peoples from all other parts of the world living in the United States. That's why we call ourselves united, and that's why we call ourselves Americans underneath this one large umbrella definition. And it's another aspect is the idea that those cultures, yes, people have them that are unique, but also that we share different things in common even though we have those differences. So globalization is a big time topic in today's world, and especially in the political world, as people are maybe even pushing for more and more of what would be the reduction of nationality or the reduction of nations themselves and moving towards what would maybe be more humanism or globalism, to say we as a human race need to take care of each other and treat each other better in this world, while looking at the other factors of how each country has different opportunities and different resources in this aspect. So there's a changing culture in our world, and it's often changing over time as a result of these different factors. Your homework assignment is to take a look at the section that we already read through. What makes a culture unique? the elements of culture you listed. You completed these 8 different bubbles, and then I wanted you to list down the individual aspects of culture that you could identify with. In the second section, when you're reading about those forms of government, you have to fill in the blank and describe the different forms of government from what you read through. And lastly, you're going to look at that aspect of changing culture. It says, as you read, list the factors that cause culture to change over time, then answer the questions below. So hopefully Mr. Shane's previous slide shows you the factors that cause culture to change. You can write those things in this blank provided and then use that information to answer this question. Choose one of the factors from the list and explain how that factor leads to globalization. How would migration, people moving, lead to globalization? How would travel lead to globalization? How would trade and the economic activity lead to globalization? All those factors that are listed here and in your reading can be used to answer not only this first portion, to list those factors, but then to answer this question and identify that you have read and learned that section. Lastly, take care of